One EQI. And it's the Joint IT Oversight Committee returning from break. We're going to, our schedule will revise a little bit from this morning. The State of Vermont IT Oversight Matrix update, which is something that we started about 2 years ago to catalog all of the information technology systems across state government, to try to identify those systems, figure out what they did, who was responsible for them, and then what risks, if any, they represented or how they rank relative to risk. We want to update that, and I know the Agency of Digital Services has been doing that while we have during the pandemic and otherwise. And today, Scott Carby, the Chief Information Security Officer of the Agency of Digital Services, is here to tell us about where that stands. So, Scott, it's to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, I'm Scott Carby. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer for the state, and I work for Secretary Quinn. So over just a quick history, over the 4 years, since a little more than 4 years now that the agency has been around, one of the things that we really wanted to do is we're always looking to increase visibility. And so part of that visibility was a true and good application inventory. So an application inventory, there's fundamentals within my cybersecurity world where, step one, you always know what you have for hardware. Step two, you always know what you have for software. That's what the fundamentals of an entire cybersecurity program are built on. So getting an application inventory was the first step. Our next step was actually orienting that so that we can make risk-based decisions and application identification based on that risk. So, and you'll forgive me, I heard you earlier, Senator. One of the things that we did was we wanted to make sure that we're treating the enemy of the perfect, or I guess whatever that saying is, good enough is really what we're looking for right now. It gives us a baseline. It allows us to take all of our applications, pile them in front of us, and start sorting them into piles. Once we had those piles, so to speak, it becomes much easier for us to target specific areas that raise concerns. So we went through, we took the inventory out of multiple systems, our help desk systems, our patch management systems, endpoint protection, agent inventories. I mean, there was just so many different places where they could be an 85% solution in 6 different places. We needed to mash that together into what I'm calling right now my 96% solution. It's a living document. It's always going to be updated as new applications are defined, and unfortunately, as they're discovered, right? It could be something as simple as user says, hey, my computer died, I need a new computer. And we get that user a new computer and they're like, and what about my program X? And we're like, what program X? And they have to describe that and they have to tell us what it is. It's a new application that's now been discovered and it goes on the application inventory and gets risk ranked based on the criteria I'm going to talk to you about. Any questions at this point? So I think, Mike, you can throw up the first slide and make sure that the first slide, same ones in my brain. Perfect. So we wanted to make sure that we use a simple method and common criteria. Different applications perform different functions, right? In some cases, it's so that somebody can get a benefit. In other cases, say at the DMV, it's so that they can get, a piece of plastic with their picture on it that proves that they have a driver's license. So there's some hard outputs from those applications, and there's some soft outputs, and then there's some that are just informational. So we had to find a way to sort of compare apples to apples on this first ranking of our inventory. So we assessed risk across 4 primary categories: the software platform that the application runs on, the hardware operating system and that platform that it runs on, the data type that an application utilizes, and the web presence of that application. And we, like I said, we really wanted it to be simple because the wider and the deeper you make that matrix, the more nuance there is to everything. And while everybody wants lots of nuance and lots of detail, sometimes it helps just to be able to look and say, that's a problematic application. That's an application we can wait on, right? So that's really where I was trying to get down to. We do assign a numerical score. I color code those in a very recognizable heat map from, the red, yellow, green, minus slightly more nuanced than that. But the same, a hot color down to a cool color to allow people to identify sort of quickly and visually what the risk is. This also did, as we went through, there were a couple of bonuses. One, it allowed a single set of eyes to evaluate for consistency. Those were my eyes, even though right now they're not all that great. But there were lots of nuance to the different types of software that were in there. And sometimes it was just a matter of having to make a call that the automated scoring system couldn't make. Because logic systems aren't great at discovering the weakest link. So as an example, and I'll just give a wild off the cuff example, if you had a piece of software that was designed in 1995, incorporated with a bunch of modern systems, it's still a risky system because there's an underlying core to that system that's a weak link that could quite easily be compromised or attacked. So the weakest link always drove the score. So in some cases, I was concerned that, wow, are we going to drive our scores like way up through the roof because we're incorporating some of these older systems. In effect, I feel like the scoring matrix works because it didn't drive all of our risk. It wasn't like we were looking at everything at the very top with just a few down at the bottom. There's a great distribution, and later on in the presentation, I've got a slide that shows that. And we also used, many of you have heard Secretary Quinn talk about the risk assessment that we did during the pandemic. We did a risk assessment in late 2020 and early 2021 across multiple domains of risk. And we used elements of that risk assessment to inform how we evaluated these applications. Next slide, Mike. As I talked about, and I've already talked about this a bit with the scripted scoring with human evaluation, I'm not going to go super in depth on this, but I know for one, like Senator Brock, you're always interested in how did we arrive by the numbers. I used a very simple litmus test, and most of that had to do with the age of the software that was being used on both the software and the hardware platforms. Data was a very simple test. Is it publicly available data or is it sensitive data? We didn't care whether it's PII or PHI or federal tax information. If it's data that needs to be protected, we want to identify that system as having a higher level of risk so that we know to look at that system and understand what we can do to reduce the risk on that system. And then the final category with the web presence. If there's no web interface, it's the lowest level of risk in that category. I'm thinking about a local logon process where you just literally go in and it's an application that's already on your computer and it has no web interaction. We have systems, our SharePoint system or content management systems where people have to access systems internally and through the web. Those are slightly riskier, but not really all that risky as long as they're still internal. And then our top two categories are external vendor-owned hosted sites, and the highest level of risk are public-facing state-owned sites, Vermont.gov's, state.vt.us sites, where we are responsible for the traffic that comes directly into that box. And so you can see that each application could well, maybe you can't, but I'll tell you, each application could score anywhere from 0 to 12. And a 12 is the highest risk system. A 0 is a system where we don't want to forget about it, but it certainly isn't something that we need to worry about today. I brought an example because one of the things, and Senator Brock, you and I were talking briefly before, I did not bring the inventory with me because I would not want to display the inventory in a public forum because it's basically the keys to everything we have, right? Software versions, how to get to it, where it is. That's nothing that you would want to have publicly. And I'm happy to talk about that in a closed session at a later time if you'd like to see a representative sampling. But this example scoring just sort of brings an example of an application that could be very typical in state government. It's been in service, it's been stable, it's been unchanged roughly for the last 6 to 8 years. The scoring would spec out that with a SQL Server 2008 and an IIS front end, the hardware platform is a 2012 server and it's available at a Vermont.gov website. We can just go down through and you can see the scoring breakdown below. And that would be a moderate system. And primarily it's a moderate system because even though Server 2012 doesn't sound like it's that old to those of us that are actually updating and patching servers, Server 2012 is in extended only support from Microsoft at this point, only getting security patches, no enhancements, no further maintenance. So we flag that system as not the riskiest of the risky systems, but pretty high risk. And so are there any questions on how I went through the scoring methodology? Okay, thank you.
Actually, I do. When you talk about risk, are we talking about risk in terms of, just describe exactly, is it sort of vulnerability from outside, from malware, for, what are we assessing?
What we're assessing with these 4 dimensions of risk are the actual functionality and exposure from an IT basis of the application. This doesn't incorporate things like business risk, which has to do with criticality of the application, has to do with system backups and what its operation parameters are. It doesn't deal with resource risking, like do we have enough money to maintain it? Do we have enough people to maintain it? This is purely from within my world. What do I see as the risk level of these applications? And right now within what we're doing, I'm the one who's driving that risk-based decision model. So that's where we're at. But we will absolutely be incorporating in later versions of our risk management some of those other dimensions.
So something that's high risk. What is that? I'm still struggling to understand.
Sure.
What risk is it? Risk to attack?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it's risk to attack. It's risk to privacy violation. It's because as we've seen, unfortunately, over the last year and a half, not every system, not every data breach has been an attack, right?
And so that's kind of what I thought. So help me understand then, you're comforted when an application is not forward-facing, not web-based. But why is that a protection, since anyone that is, I remember the example of malware was found at a computer at BED, right? This was the Russians were coming for our grid. And what we learned in that story, at least in the media reports, was much of BED was completely not even connected to the internet, not Wi-Fi, not even wired, wherever possible, they were isolated that way. So the computers that were running the grid. So that's not the case when you're using your test. So help me understand why we draw that line, since any of the machines that are running the applications are likely online. Does that, and forgive me, because,
No.
I'm fairly ignorant here.
No, it's actually a really good question. It boils down to what level of voluntary exposure are we making to the system? If a member of the public has the ability to simply go on the internet, type a URL into a browser and get to a system, they've now been presented some piece of that system, some micro slice of that system. And we see a lot of attacks occur when people just begin exploring those systems, right? A misconfiguration in one place, or an old default password left in another place provides them the ability to what we would say own the machine. And once they own the machine on the inside, they're inside. The same thing can happen absolutely with a phishing email and an application that's been opened on the inside. But we have protections in place in those areas. We have endpoint protection, we have firewalls, we have threat intelligence feeds, we have email security that scans attachments as they come in. Are they perfect? No, but I have a higher level of confidence in those systems than I do in external web-facing systems.
Right, that helps. Thank you.
Sure.
May I make a follow-up comment? So I was struggling similarly with Senator Pearson's commentary there, and I think it's really, I have a different idea of what risk means in my mind, and I love your presentation, your technique of assessing application exposure vulnerability, and I think where you're coming from, Senator Pearson, is similar in my mind, is going to really assess risk of these systems. I want to know like user base, I want to know outage impact, what the cost would be, as well as what the cost to address them would be. So I love this presentation and giving this overall inventory, but I think what I keep getting hung up on is that term risk, which means something else to me in a lot of other contexts.
Right, and that's why I appreciate the questions asking me to sort of specify where we're at with risk, because an overarching risk management framework addresses, I mean, IT is only a small piece of an overarching IT risk framework.
Well, the risks that you are largely talking about are the risks for intrusion, the risk associated with ill will directed towards a system. Among the risks, though, that I'm most concerned about are the risks that we saw, for example, in the Department of Labor system. It's elderly and it's about to fall over on its side. How do you assess that kind of risk?
So those risks are somewhat identified within this model based on the age of the platform, the software, and the front end, back end that the software is running on, plus the server platform. In some cases, the labor systems using a mainframe service alleviates some of that. But again, the risk that you're talking about isn't that cybersecurity risk.
Yeah, there's different kinds of risks. In other words, is the issue, and that in a way is my question: is in what you're doing here in terms of figuring out the risk of a system, is it a single risk that we ought to be focused at as an overall risk score? And maybe it is, but should there in effect be subscores that at least tell us what kind of risk we're concerned about?
Absolutely, that would be it. And I don't even want to say in a perfect world, in a right world, that's where we would be. But I would also, I also don't want to necessarily sign our agency up to be the risk manager for all state systems. If it's IT related, absolutely, that's our responsibility. But in some cases, as you said, the labor system, while there was an IT kernel to the cause there, much of the process, say, was process-based with people and in the use of old mailing programs and automated envelope stuffing. And so in some cases, I want to make sure that what we can fix and what we can target quickest and to reduce overall system risk is what I'm focused on. Once I feel like we have a handle on that, branching out into multiple dimensions of risk becomes much easier as well, because we're not dealing with 7 immature systems that we're trying to jam together. We're dealing with fewer immature systems of risk management to blend those into one overall risk.
Well, essentially what we're talking about is IT risk management.
Correct.
And now we have that function existing in state government in ADS, which didn't, before ADS, never really existed in a discrete and concentrated fashion. And so we've made progress. And the only thing that I would just point out is that risk oversight overall is broader than IT. And that is something in state government we haven't yet addressed.
Shall I continue?
My hands are down.
Okay. So I have just a couple of quick charts I want to share with you because, you know, and this is where I said, you know, earlier, I'm fairly upbeat about this because this is a really exciting step that we've taken to get to a point where we can begin visualizing this data and begin having common criteria to make decisions. And one piece in the early analysis portion that came out was, if you look at the third bar down, which is the Agency of Natural Resources, I had no idea that the Agency of Natural Resources had the second most number of applications across our inventory. I didn't know that. Anecdotally, I ranked them based on the number of employees that we had, the number of functionalities that went on. Just by simply doing this inventory and doing this ranking, we could see an area where we should absolutely look and make sure that we're doing everything that we can to ensure that level of security is there. I will say that the Agency of Natural Resources has done a great job with the risks to their applications. So it wasn't like there was a massive number of exposed applications out there that made me start sweating as soon as I read it. But it was an interesting piece for me to say, wow, what can I learn from just starting to use the data that we've put together?
I do have a quick question here. So does this chart, would it be fair to say that this chart reflects investment in IT infrastructure? So for instance, we've made a lot of investment in IT at the Agency of Natural Resources and not at labor. So applications per agency?
Correct. So this is I'm sorry.
Just help me understand like that difference. What should we know about why do we have a difference like that? Do we care more about the environment than the people?
I would say what it comes down to is that a lot of the applications in natural resources are smaller, innovative, kind of like the Fish and Wildlife app that you can get on your phone now. And so the Agency of Natural Resources has really thought like, what piece of technology can we incorporate and push forward to, to the public? Whereas labor, as we know, we've all experienced it. It's a very like legacy system. It's a very legacy mentality as to how to deal with labor issues.
So more, maybe what we could take away is that it's more modernized or it's more digitized.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. That's helpful.
Okay.
Laura, I would say it's more a reflection, I think from having looked at these before, is a reflection of the diversity of the department. For instance, Agency of Human Services, we all know they have umpteen million different programs that do or different services to the public. And so they have all these programs. A&R does that in a way too, whereas labor, they have 3 or 4 basic functions of that department. I mean, there's more than that, of course, but they're relying upon only 3 or 4 basic things. Whereas A&R just has a diversity of things in everything they do, and others, maybe should have more than they do. But I think this is more a reflection of
Size.
of size and the diversity of within their portfolio.
Okay.
as opposed to investment.
And I think what I'm hearing is that the number of applications doesn't directly correlate to the spend on that department.
I would not, I can only make an assumption that that's true. I don't know those numbers.
But smaller applications presumably do result in smaller spend, and these A&R applications in a lot of cases seem like they're very focused applications that are limited in scope and perhaps limited in complexity. Another issue.
And this visual in the next one doesn't give us an idea of the reach and how many people actually use the system from both an administrative side as well as how many constituents use it. But that's not part of the criteria in your evaluation.
Yes. And so the next slide is actually the one that I discussed that shows the distribution of our risk across different categories. As I said, I went a little broader than just red, yellow, green.
Yeah.
But I do lump both the yellow and the green as low risk, one being like a lower elevated risk, whereas one is a low standard risk. And mostly, as I looked at it, I was quite heartened that our distribution is kind of not where I expected it to be. As I said, I expected us to be much more, to have much more high risk because honestly, even as people, we can say, oh, I've heard about this bad thing and I've heard about that bad thing. You just start to see the overall worse in the picture, what's worse in the picture. And in this case, the fact that almost half of our applications fit in that moderate category, that's where in a new system, in an evolving system where you would expect to see them. So I'm very happy to see that there. One piece that I could call your attention to is all the way over on the right, which is that purple bar, where I need data. And to be clear, it means that I didn't have enough data to score those applications. And that could be simply missing one piece of information because I wouldn't want to enter an incorrect score simply because I was waiting for refinement.
Well, does that suggest that you have a lot of information about things that belong to the executive branch, but perhaps less information about what belongs to the other branches of government?
I'm not tracking, and this is only executive branch.
So you're not tracking the legislative or the judiciary?
I am not.
Okay. And do you know if the legislative or the judiciary branch is tracking risk?
I have had conversations with, I did not have a conversation with Kevin. Secretary had a conversation with Kevin.
Mm-hmm.
I've spoken with Doug a couple of times. Doug has my formula, my risk criteria, and the judiciary is moving toward using the same model that we are to gauge theirs.
Okay.
It's good news. So, okay, so moving in this direction, because this is I commend you all. This is a very significant step forward from the last time we.
Yeah, and this is where we intended to go and
Yeah.
been talking about it for a while. So I'm glad to see that the progress has been made over the pandemic because you haven't had anything else to do during that time. So you've had time to work on it.
Right. But it does seem like it would be really important to have all three branches. I shouldn't say it seems like it would be important. It is important for us to understand the risk across all three branches.
And I love this slide because and I'm glad that you didn't include which systems fall in these red and the dark red, but I feel like that's probably going to be part of our next discussion is in closed session, because we need to understand how far to reach and now really go into that risk. I think you were thinking about if one of these critical systems, which are more exposed, the way you've identified them, how do we find what resources are needed and how do we find them?
And that's the goal. That's the goal in all of this is to help us focus on what we ought to be focused on so that if there's something that hasn't been addressed during the normal legislative process for attention, that we can help focus at this point.
And I think that really my goal to this is to provide Secretary Quinn with the tool to be able to socialize that risk with the other agency heads, right? With the other secretaries, with the department head, with the commissioners, so that they can have realistic discussions about resourcing and is now the time where you simply need to update, or do we need to upgrade, or do we need to replace that application? And this is the right time in the budget cycle to socialize that so that it can be built in and discussions for next year's budget can be had.
Please.
The rest of it, I know that we're,
Press for
running short on time. But and I think I've addressed most of what's on the next couple of slides, but as a matter of fact, one under the what did we learn, that middle bullet is sort of what I just said, right? We want to make sure that this committee, that the legislature as a whole, that the agency leadership understands that the applications as they have them, while seemingly stable to them, creates a point of risk for the enterprise as a whole. And in some cases, there's risk acceptance or there's risk mitigation that can be done. But it's really important. We can't even have the conversation unless we have a baseline with which to have that conversation. I don't want to be Chicken Little running in and going, oh my God, your application is terrible. Because the first thing somebody's going to say to me is, on what basis do you say that? And then finally, one piece that I think addresses Senator Chittenden and Senator Pearson's question is that this application inventory that we have is in I would like to say it's in a simple flat file. It's not. It's in one of those worst of the worst kind of multi-tab spreadsheet, formula-driven documents. But we have, as part of our risk assessment last year and part of our overall change to risk-based decision-making within our cybersecurity program, incorporated the Archer GRC tool into our application inventory. And the Archer GRC tool, GRC stands for Governance, Risk, and Compliance. It will allow us to input this inventory in, and all of those dimensions, all of those fields that you're looking to have information on can be also placed into the system. And then an application's overall risk can be judged on whatever criteria you want that to be judged on. I do not want to overpromise. That's still a lot of work to come, but getting what we've done into that system first is really where my primary motivation is. And then, yeah, I guess that's it. Other questions?
Well, let us perhaps one question, and then let's move on to the last 10 minutes to
Well, this could
plan
be
the rest
part
of the year.
This could be part of the last 10 minutes, which
Okay.
is, I'd like to hear more about the risk-based decision-making within our cybersecurity program.
Mhm.
That's a lot of things right there, I'd like to
And
understand.
that, as you know, we're going to be spending a lot of time on cybersecurity. And perhaps that may in fact be the subject of an entire meeting.
Yeah.
And so I think we'll have a lot of opportunity to delve into that more.
Well, as you can tell, I love talking about the subject. So let's dig in.
Well, good. Oh, thank you very, very much. It's a very informative presentation. And I'm glad to see the progress we're making. I do have the chart that you sent out of all of the basic applications, and it is extremely secure because even with a magnifying glass, really read it. So, it's a great technique you've developed.
Yes, yes, we've shrunk it down to 2-point font and put it white on white. So,
Well, again, thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, in the few minutes we have left, I think it would be useful just to talk at a very high level at this point about where we go from here in terms of areas of concentration for the committee going forward. I would suggest that that many of you have taken a lot of notes on what we heard today, and perhaps it would be useful if we don't get to discuss in depth all of those things in the next few minutes, but if you jot down some of those thoughts of areas of concern, areas of focus, things that you would like to look at during the course of the year, and send them to me, and Seth and I will digest and perhaps use those as a basis for at least the next meeting or two, and that we will allocate some time and perhaps more time in our next meeting to talk in more depth about where we go when we're not so pressed for time and in keeping with the schedule. As I mentioned, I'm planning to look for a meeting in very early August. And in that meeting, we have a couple of things that we're required to do by statute. One of which is to look at some issues of education and education funding. And those plans, again, have to be approved by us before the money can be spent. The second is the Department of Labor systems, and those too have to be approved by us before a certain amount of the money can be spent. And we had hoped, in fact, to deal with the DOL stuff in today's meeting, but based on the review that Dan Smith has done, he's raised, I think, a number of very legitimate questions about the state of where that project is. And we've not gotten the feedback yet from Secretary Quinn and from the Department of Labor in response to those questions. And I don't think it would be appropriate for us to try to resolve those issues without getting those questions, which are very good questions, answered. So that's still pending. And I hope that we'll have answers sufficient, to be able to be distribute them to the committee in advance so that you can look at it and have a chance to digest it, and then have a meeting scheduled to deal with it. On the Department of Education pieces, I don't have a whole lot of information on that. I have sent to Secretary Quinn again an issue of where do we stand on that? What information do we have to be able to present to the committee so that we have the basis of being able to make a decision, and they don't have an answer to that as yet.
Is the DOL, the UI thing still effectively offline? I mean, users, right, didn't we shut down the web portal because that was my mistake?
No, it's operating.
Well,
I
it's
didn't-
operated, but I thought some of the web interface was taken offline because of the fraud problems, no?
Oh, for application purposes, yes, they did take it off for a short term because there was an increase in fraudulent claims, but I think it's gone back on again.
Yeah.
Well-
Do you know the answer to that?
I don't, Senator.
I'm not aware of it being shut down, although I may not be fully aware of where that is, but I'm not aware of it.
Okay. I mean, that is an acute
Yes.
challenge, and actually there's the numbers are starting to ramp back up, right? We just saw unemployment numbers are climbing a little bit. So, my observation, having served on this committee a little bit, is I think in general are moving away from these crises systems. And it sounds like a lot of state government has now got a kind of a tech side as opposed to department. It's like a lot of it, we're breaking down the stratification. But for years, almost all we talked about was healthcare and so that's appropriate. But I think our colleagues would probably be comforted to know that we're at least looking at where there are acute problems as part of our work.
I would agree. In the few minutes we have left, as you think of top level issues that should be on the forefront of what this committee does over the next year, that you're able to kind of summarize as a bullet point, what would they be in your minds?
Cyber and the $159 million in IT investments that we made last year.
Well, more
More than that.
well, no, we didn't make any more than that, but the question I have is the long-term investments in IT.
Yeah.
Because we put in 60 million this year. The 80 is just their regular budget. The 60 was extra stuff And yet, John Quinn will tell you, we got $1 billion worth of stuff we need over the next 10 years. And I'm sure judiciary and legislature will, give us things like that. Just have a broad overview of what's coming down the pike and then a broad discussion of how do we finance it.
And then perhaps a broad discussion of the gap. We're looking at obviously all the money that we're getting in federal funding. We're looking at the possibility of more infrastructure money coming, but regardless, it's never going to be enough.
No. And so
Never
the
gonna be
question
enough.
is, what other funding sources
Yeah.
should we encourage the legislature?
And of course, the prioritization
Right.
relative to that. What are the things that we absolutely have to get done
And what would be
and
the
and move
sequence?
forward and make significant progress on?
Right.
Well, maybe, well, sir, go ahead.
I was just gonna say for the bullet points, identity management and single sign-on, continual reporting on that. I think there's policy implications there and just trying to unify both the judiciary, the legislative, as well as the administrative side and what we allow and don't allow when it comes to third-party services. I think of Google identity management. So getting some unification and guidance to all of the different aspects of state government. So single sign-on is of great interest and I think there's already fair enough attention spent on it, but I think hearing about which direction they're going in will be useful over the next year.
I guess I am curious if there are projects that AES thinks might fall under infrastructure in terms of if we are seeing another tranche of money. So some understanding of how folks are thinking about those opportunities. Or at the same time, I guess you guys in approach would want to know, are there things we funded that could be shifted and, just some understanding of those intersections?
Well, and just continuation of, the money we put in this year for the DMV is only 1/3 of the money they need. They still gonna need another 50 million. And continuation of the UI. The money we put in is just a small amount. We need to do more.
Well, to Senator Pearson's point, we had talked about municipality interfacing with the state. And so when we're thinking about infrastructure, that may be a place where, and I don't even know if we have any sense of what the need is out there for safe interactions.
Very big firewall.
Well, they need to get in. That's the problem.
You're on the inside of it.
Yeah.
Very valid, very valid. Anything else that's on your top level list at this point? And I know rather than rush it, take some time and think about it. Think about what we've heard today. We've gotten the big overview of the systems from the three branches of government. We've looked at the issue of all the applications that we have running around. We focused on one thing, integrated eligibility. I think one of the things that we also should think about is as an overall area is the area of telecommunications. Although we're starting with the broadband board, and I think its first meeting is on the 9th, and they will have a task, and that board has an oversight function of itself, and I don't want to duplicate with heavy-handed oversight, but that is something that should be on our agenda because we did a very narrow focus of community broadband through CUDs, and there's a lot in the telecommunications area that goes beyond that, ranging from emergency communication to cellular to there are just lots of things that are not on that agenda right now. And I think those are areas that also fall under this committee's jurisdiction. The whole cellular thing, we could take almost a session and devote just to the state of cellular in Vermont. I don't know if you've seen it, but up my way with both AT&T and Verizon, there's a firestorm about poor service or lack of service, towers being down with AT&T that nobody knows about and haven't been told about, reduced service in border areas in terms of speed. So there are lots of factors that really aren't being discussed. And although those are federally preempted, so that the state has limited ability to do something, what we do have the ability to do is to shine light on problems and get people's attention. And that may be something that is worth doing and really understanding the scope of that, of the problem and the issue. Beyond that, we'll wait till we hear more from you about other things, and then we'll circle back and communicate to you as part of what the plan for the next meeting. as I mentioned, the next meeting will be sometime in early August. Would it make sense to even try to select a meeting date today, or would a doodle poll be better for you?
Are we able to participate remotely? Because I'm not going to be in state early August, but
I won't
Yeah.
either.
Yeah. I mean, what joint rules basically said when we went through this is that the expectation is that people would be here unless they had a reason not to. And of course, you wouldn't be out of state if you didn't have a reason.
Can we, well, there's no, I was gonna say, can we vote, but there's nothing, I mean, we don't.
Not
have-
voting too.
Yeah.
You might be voting on
Yeah.
the UI approval.
Correct,
That's the
for-
only thing I'm thinking
for-
about, if you're gonna, if you decide to give them authority, they need your approval to move, to
Right.
spend the money.
So they need at least a majority to be able to do that. And the same thing with education.
Do we-
Are we able to-
Voting issues.
We have to be present for voting.
I'm not the lawyer, I'll let Maria speak to that, but I believe that's right.
say that it's a.
Do we have to be present for voting, Maria? Yes.
Yes,
You're muted.
you're muted,
Sorry.
Maria.
Sorry, am I on now? Yes,
Yeah.
I believe you
Yeah.
do have to be present for voting for official action.
Are you gone the first week of August?
First 2 weeks.
First 2 weeks. I'm the first week.
Myself as well.
So I guess we're not meeting the first week of August. That's because I'm gone,
There you
yeah.
So the second week, I'd be able to participate, just not vote. Which as long as I'm not too many of us, I think that probably works, but.
Early that week's bad for me, but I'm free Wednesday on.
Well, if we look at a calendar quickly,
For the week of the 16th.
the only issue is the time sensitivity of the UI, whether or not we want to push it out that far, because I gather there is some urgency for the UI folks in getting this moving, but what I don't know at this point is whether or not they are going to be ready to have addressed the issues in Dan's memo. Do you
I
have any
have
feedback?
not, I have not heard, Dan was listening earlier, I don't know that he may have, he may not be on because I was texting him earlier, so I can't speak to that, Dan might know. And maybe I'm thinking that I sent, maybe you all, I should send you all the link, I sent it to the chair and I think the vice chair's received the memo, but Jan Smith wrote a memo with some issues related to the UI. And they should be addressing him, I don't know, short story is he doesn't recommend releasing the funds until they address these issues. So I think you want to see if they have addressed them, I don't.
And then, of course, the complication is that Dan Smith is leaving at the end of August.
Hiring,
Yeah,
yes.
so that's an issue, and at some point, we're going to,
We are in the process of interviewing replacements for him, but
Good.
they will not be up to speed like he is on this particular issue, but
sure.
this is clearly one of the key issues that they'll have to address.
But Senator, just another issue on that DOL, another part of what the Appropriations Committee put in there was not only these technical issues that Dan has pointed out, but the assurance from DOL that they have personnel and they have the leadership capacity in order to actually get this project up and moving. And we need assurance from Commissioner Harrington that that does exist.
I have an idea.
Yep.
So given that we have so many, why don't we have a check-in meeting the first or second week? Which we don't have, which there's no expectation that we're voting, that's short. Like an hour or something, and then plan a voting meeting.
Well, I mean, in point of fact, we have enough to do based on all the things that we have to do. And in my mind, if we're going to have a meeting, we probably ought to have a meeting that's a full meeting that may focus on presentations rather than action if necessary, because we're not ready to act and everybody's not there to vote. But by doing so, we at least have the opportunity to participate remotely in the event that people are available, depending on where they are. Or secondly, we've got a YouTube so that you can view the meeting and the content, even if it's not contemporaneous. And
Give me more pleasure than watching the meeting while I'm on vacation.
you can watch it after the vacation. So if we look at doing something during the week of August 9,
Sorry.
and then if we're ready for either of those two things to vote, we still will have a quorum presumably to be able to do so. And if we don't, we put it off. But I think we're going to have 2 meetings in August regardless of what we do one way or the other. And I would rather have a real meeting than a check-in meeting. So that if we're going to take the time to convene, that we might as well do all the things that will be lagging if we don't do. And so the question is, if we look at the week of August the 9th, is any particular day better than any other for anyone?
The 9th.
Senator Chittenden said.
11th, 12th, or 13th would be great for me.
Yeah.
9th and 10th are really bad.
I'm booked on the 12th.
11th.
I am available on the 11th, which is the Wednesday. Does that work for everybody? Yep. Okay, 9 to 12 on the 11th. 9 to 12 on the 11th.
I'll get the information out to the group.
Okay, and we'll work on the agenda for that particular meeting. In the meantime, any input that you give us for today's meeting, we'll digest and to the extent necessary, perhaps deal with some of it then. And then Seth and I will get together and create an agenda for that meeting that will then circulate.
I do think it's pretty relevant whether or not the department is able to
Yes.
respond to Dan.
Right.
I think no matter what, you probably want to hear from Dan since it will be his last.
Yeah, I agree with that, but just I guess I would encourage the chair to not put too much else on there. It's a pretty big topic.
Yeah, that's a big topic.
For that
I would agree. I would agree.
And I will send this link to Mike report to all of you all. Yes,
Good.
Well, we received the memo, the Dan Smith memo.
Yeah.
Randy sent it to us.
Okay, you've all got it.
I distributed. Yeah.
Good, okay, good.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, on that note, let us perhaps, if there's nothing else, adjourn. There's a motion to do that.
So moved.